Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here in a second. I want to just go over some quick logistics for the workshop today. So today's session is being recorded, which we will send out afterwards and also make available online. The other item is that if you would like to ask questions during the session, please feel free to share those in the chat. If you want to ask a question to all participants, you can just share that with everyone. If you would prefer to ask a question and remain anonymous, feel free to just send that message to me and I will address it without identifying your name. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. All right, so today we are talking about informational interviewing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Mant. I am an assistant dean in the graduate school. I am also the director of the Career Development Office. Today's session is just one workshop in the Career Development Office's Career Skills series. These workshops also cover career exploration and planning, CVs, and resumes. Our next workshop will be LinkedIn and how to create and utilize LinkedIn effectively, which we will host on October 21st. We also do a workshop on networking. So again, these practical skills that will become important for you as you transition in your careers. So keep an eye out for future offerings. So when we think about career exploration and transitions, there's really this multi-step process that can become effective. And it all starts with you. So the diversity of careers available in science is pretty much limitless. If you identify something you like doing, chances are there's a career that allows you to do that thing. And so spending some time identifying what do you like becomes very important in this process. Once you know what you like doing, then you can find those positions that will allow you to do those things. Today, what we're going to talk about is the third step in this process, which is informational interviewing. And so this is really how you go about learning more about those specific careers, what goes into them, information you can't necessarily discern just from looking at a job posting. Informational interviewing, as we'll talk about, also is a really effective tool for building out a professional network and setting yourself up for career transitions. The fourth step in this process is experiential learning. So this could be something like shadowing, it could be doing an internship, some freelance contract work. And again, all of those opportunities can come out of informational interviewing. So we're going to focus on that aspect of this today, but our other workshops will address some of these other components to the career exploration and transition process. Specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to talk very briefly about career options. We're going to discuss some of the fundamentals of informational interviewing. Hopefully you had a chance to use the worksheet to craft a career story and a science story. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that exercise, and if you have questions about that, again, we'll get into the details of why having those ready becomes important, especially for informational interviewing, but just for your career in general. And then we'll talk about some strategies for how do you actually put these into practice. This workshop was developed off some material that was created by Sarah Cardozo-Duncan, who is a career counselor. She came in a couple of years ago and did a workshop for us. And so a lot of these recommendations also come from her. All right, before we start, I want to figure out where are people today? Where do you stand in terms of your actual career interests? So we're going to do a quick little poll that should pop up on your screen. So currently, what type of career are you thinking about? All right, so what do we have? So you all can see, somebody just give me a thumbs up, you can see the poll results, correct? Yes, okay. So the winner here is industry scientist with 52%. Government researcher came up pretty high. Other industry positions, medical writer. Other is 22. I would be curious for the people who selected other, if you want to throw into the chat, what was one of the careers that you're thinking about specifically that didn't show up here? As we talk about this, though, I think one of the things that's interesting is that there's been a real shift over time from most people going into graduate school or postdoctoral training because they're interested in a tenure track career. And that's changed, right? We now start to recognize that there are a lot of different things that people can do with their scientific careers, just as evidenced by this. This is a pretty even split for things. And this, again, as I came up with this, was just a handful of the careers that are out there. When we think about what can people do with a PhD as a PhD researcher, you go through a whole host of things, right? So this is just not meant to be all inclusive. This is just one smattering of opportunities that are out there. Most of us are familiar with the principal PI, research-intensive positions, research in industry. There are a lot of staff scientist positions that are developing now. And so again, as we go through what is available to people, you start to see that there are a whole host of careers that are out there. Science education and curriculum development. There's a former postdoc who runs an outreach program now at Boulder that's an NSF-funded opportunity, and they really focus on increasing diversity in science, and they do a lot of K-12 education. Postdocs have gone and actually been high school science teachers. But other careers like intellectual property. So entrepreneurship is a field, but if you like the idea of helping cultivate new scientific discoveries, something working at maybe like our tech transfer office, CU Innovations, there are a number of PhDs on staff there. Medical science liaison, government research positions. That one came up kind of big, right? So there are all of these careers out here. And so the question then becomes, well, what do these really entail? What goes into these careers? Because we're familiar with the academic career because that's where we're trained. That's where we have most access to people. So someone shared health foundations or advocacy organizations. So not-for-profits, right? Professional societies have a lot of PhDs on staff. And again, it's all about what do you like doing? And so when you start to understand that you have interest in these different areas, how do you get more information about what that career actually is? And so that's really where we're going to launch into informational interviewing as a tool to help you get that kind of insight and knowledge that you're not going to get just from reading articles. Before we launch into this, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is building job search resiliency. And when we talk about resiliency, usually it's more in a mental health capacity. How do you respond to challenges? That's really what this is. I think the strategies that go into becoming a resilient person become really important for your career as well. And so I just want to frame things a little bit before we start this process, because we need to acknowledge that career transitions are stressful. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of worry and anxiety. And so they're very difficult to do, especially when you go it alone. And so developing a resiliency strategy can be really important for you as you start to make these transitions. I think it's more important than ever right now, right? When we talk about uncertainty and things that are out of our control, that's really where we're at. We don't know when the pandemic is going to end. We don't know what the impacts are going to be on careers and opportunities that are out there. And so thinking about this through the framework of resiliency becomes really important. So resilience, so I take this information from Sharon Milgram, who's the director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the NIH. So she oversees all career and professional development for PhD students and postdocs who train at the NIH. And she has this simple equation for resilience. And so she says that resilience equals people plus process, okay? So people are the network that you have, people who are there to support you. Process are those resources that are available to you. People who are resilient prepare to be resilient. So this goes with the last point, which will be about a growth mindset. You're not either born resilient or you're not. This is something that you can develop. This is something that you can work at to increase. To be resilient, there are a number of things we need to do. So we need to learn from our previous experiences, good and bad. So when you think about your career, it's important to identify what you like doing, but it's equally important to identify what you don't like doing. So when you think about currently what you do in the lab, there are going to be a lot of things that you can point to and say, you know what, when I got to talk about science, or I got to lead that presentation, that was a really good day for me. But then you can also point to those things that may be the same. When I had to give that presentation, I hated that. I really don't want to do that thing, right? So learning from the things you don't like can be just as informative as learning from the things that you do like. Building strong, positive professional relationships, right? You are not alone in this process. You're not alone in your career transition. You're not alone in your science. This notion that we are self-sufficient and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we do it all our own is just nonsense, and it's always been nonsense. Everybody benefits from having people around them who can help hold them up, support them. This can be a peer network of just your friends, but this can be people who are in positions beyond you who can give some advice about how to get where they are now. This is about your careers, though. I think this gets lost oftentimes when we talk to PhD students and postdocs, which is, well, I'm being trained to be a faculty member. That was a great career decision for your advisor. That's what they wanted to do. That's wonderful. If you don't want to do that thing, that's okay. We're not preparing anyone for one specific thing. This is about your career. And so you have to start adopting that mindset and start feeling empowered a little bit to make choices about, well, what do you want to do? You have to take advantage of the resources that are available to you because this is about you. And then finally, it's developing that growth mindset, right? There are things that if we apply ourselves and we try, we can learn and we can grow. We may not be great at that right now, but we can get better. Rather than saying, I can do that thing or I can't do that thing. So I just want to frame this whole process as part of building some job search resilience, because one of the things that'll happen through doing informational interviews is you're going to learn about experiences, yours and others, good and bad. You're going to build strong, positive professional relationships. You're the one who's going to conduct these. You're being proactive in taking them out. And you're going to continue to learn things from that. And if you're nervous about that process right now, that's okay. If you practice at it, you will get better at it, okay? So I just want to spend a brief moment talking about that aspect to this whole career exploration and transition. Okay, so how do we learn about different careers? Coming back to this resilient strategy, we're going to talk about people. So there are people out there who can give you information, who can be those supportive resources and those positive professional relationships. And informational interviewing is the tool that will allow you to best leverage that. All right, so just a second quick poll, because I'm curious, at this point in time, how do you feel about informational interviewing? All right, so overwhelmingly, there's a little bit of anxiety about the process of conducting an informational interview, and that makes sense, right? There are a lot of things that are unknown about this process. Just the notion of, what you may conceptualize, I gotta call up somebody who I don't know and ask them to talk to me about things. That can produce a lot of worry and anxiety. So one of the goals for today is to go through some practical things that you can do to demystify this process, to demonstrate how you can scientifically approach this and prepare for them, and hopefully address some of that anxiety so you feel more comfortable about your ability to use this important tool. And one of the things that I will say is that the people who created the AAAS My IDP, for a long time, the individual development plan, which is this My IDP thing, was thought as like, that's what trainees need to do to be successful in their careers. The NIH requires that you talk about how you use an IDP in a progress report. So this was like the most important thing, right? So the people who created that have done subsequent research about what actually helps people transition in their careers. And they did this looking at postdocs and PhD students. And what they found is that, shockingly, it's not having an IDP. What they found was most important for those career transitions was doing an informational interview. So again, this tool is going to be one of the most effective things that you can do when you start to think about making career transitions. And so getting comfortable doing it is going to be an important process. So what is an informational interview? All right, so you have a couple goals here. One, you want to make a good impression. Okay, this is an opportunity for you to start presenting yourself to the professional world. These are the things that you're interested in. You want to start getting information that is going to help you make a decision. Okay, there's a lot of detail you can get when looking at a job posting. You can pull information out there, but you get a list of 30 things. I promise you, you're not going to do each of those 1/30th of the time. So where do you actually spend your time in a job? You can get a lot of information about a career that you can't get from other places. You want to start building out that professional network, and you want to start getting referrals from people. And I don't mean somebody who is going to refer you for a job, right? I mean somebody who can help connect you to other people so that you have an opportunity to continue expanding your professional network, which is that last goal. All right, basic structure to an informational interview. You're going to start with an introduction telling them why you want to conduct an informational interview. Okay, why are you reaching out to them? You want to thank them for their time and consideration, right? You're going to have a list of questions. Okay, you want to go into this prepared, knowing, well, what are you trying to learn about that career? And we're going to go into more detail about all of these things as we go through the workshop. But you also want to be prepared to talk about yourself. And this is where the science story and the career story come in. Because inevitably, what happens when you do an informational interview and you start that conversation, somebody's going to say to you, oh, yeah, no, I'm happy to talk with you. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself? Right? The dreaded question, tell me about yourself. And what do you say? Right? So you want to be prepared in that moment to highlight what it is that you bring, what you're interested in, what kind of science you do, because this is an opportunity for you to start helping them understand what you're interested in. And then finally, you want to finish with a thank you. You appreciate their time. And then we're going to talk about this thing called a warm referral, which is where you get additional connections. All right. So we're going to go through these step by step. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. I'll try to address them as I can. So starting off, building good impressions. You want to be prepared, right? For most positions, well, what have you done so far? You're a researcher, okay? So if you go into this and you're like, oh, I don't know. So what is it that you do? That's sending a message, right? You want to go into this ready to ask questions. You want to do some upfront research. Science is a small community, okay? It doesn't matter if it is looking for local bioscience industry jobs or it's working at professional societies. People are connected in ways that would surprise you. And so you really have one chance to make a good first impression. And so you want to go into that being prepared. Now, I have an asterisk here because that can put a lot of pressure on yourself, right? So be mindful of that and use that as motivation. So one of the things that we talk about with imposter fears or imposter syndrome, people may have heard of, right? This idea that, well, I'm here because I got lucky, not because I actually earned it. I look at all my peers and they really know their stuff. I'm just kind of faking it till I make it kind of things, right? And so I think a lot of times we can suffer from having those imposter fears, those worries, right? But a little bit of doubt can be a helpful thing when you keep it under control. If you went into all your presentations feeling like, oh no, I got it in the bag, it's not going to be a problem, that's probably not going to go so well when you stand up and give that talk, right? Being concerned, it can be that motivation to do the extra homework. So try to use it as that, right? This idea that you want to do your best within reason, under your control, do your best to make a good first impression. Use that as motivation, okay? So be mindful of that, but don't put too much pressure on yourself for it. You want to research the person, the company, the field, etc. Okay, so you want to know as much as you can about that position before you go into it. So you don't want to ask them the questions that you can get on a job posting. Okay, that's not going to be helpful because that's information that's present to you, right? So you want to do that research ahead of time. You should know the company's mission. Why are you interested in that company? What is it about that company that gets you excited to do that work? They're going to have a web page. They're going to have information on their values, the things they stand for. Do as much of that homework as you can ahead of time, okay? You also want to think about why are you a good person to know so that you're prepared to share that information with them. And value becomes a big piece when we talk about networking. Oftentimes people go into networking thinking about, well, why do I need to know that person because they can do this thing for me? And that transactional nature of networking makes it feel a little bit dirty sometimes, I guess. But really, if you approach networking positively, you shift it and say, here's why people should know me. It's because you can provide value. If you approach networking in that way, you are much more likely to establish positive professional relationships. So start thinking about, what are those things that you offer? And this is where the science story and career story can come in. You want to be professional, right? Always. This is, in the COVID age, dress is really just anchorman profile, right? So from the waist up, you don't have to worry about it as much, but thinking about what kind of presence am I trying to establish? I want to be seen as this kind of person. I want to be known in this way, right? Thinking about your backgrounds, that is something that can become really important. So finding a space where you feel comfortable, because the other aspect to dress that becomes important that we don't stress enough is that confidence will be impacted, right? If you're, so back in the, if you're doing something like this in person at some point, and this goes true if you're interviewing, if you're ever interviewing for things, being comfortable and confident becomes really important, because if you're distracted because the shirt doesn't quite fit right, or you're thinking about how uncomfortable your shoes are, or whatever it is, that's going to distract you from your ability to actually focus on the conversation. The conversation, keeping it professional, staying away from political commentary, things of that nature. Obviously, those are things that don't necessarily add anything to the conversation at this point. So remaining professional. And then you want to go into this first knowing what do you want them to know about you. And the reason for this is that oftentimes when people think about an informational interview, one of those outcomes they're hoping for is that somebody is going to have some idea of a job in mind, right? Either at their company or they're going to know about something else. You're never going to ask them about a job, okay? That's not the purpose of this. That becomes, that's a step too far. You're trying to learn about their career. But going into this, they know you're looking for a job because you're exploring careers. You're trying to figure things out. So let them know what you would want somebody to know about you. What skills do you bring? What is the what kind of values you have? What are the non-research or technical skills that you offer? What are those things that you do well? So spending a little bit of time thinking about, here's what I would want people to know about me before you initiate the conversation becomes important, again, so that you're ready to address, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay, so there was a worksheet on this. I want to spend a little bit of time addressing some questions that people may have if they had a chance to fill it out. Before we get to that, I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So with the science story, you have some pretty clear goals, right? You want to get somebody excited about the work that you do, and you want to start a conversation. It's not something where you're going to tell them all the detailed nuance of all of the work that you do. You want to hook them in. You want to get them interested to ask you questions. You want them to be an active participant in the conversation, okay? So that's your goal here. And one of the things that I think we forget about so often in science is we focus on talking to the lay public or something like that, right? And so it's like, oh, well, we got to take all the jargon out and we got to, make it easy to understand. That is all important, but one of the things that we forget is that even within the scientific community, if you're a postdoc talking to another postdoc in a different discipline, it's not that they don't understand what you're doing, it's that they don't care, right? Because they chose a different field. They're interested in a different flavor of science. So why are you excited about it? Why are you interested in it, right? That needs to get added into the conversation as well. You have to make it accessible, though, okay? One of the problems is that, again, when we come back to these imposter fears, right, we're always worried that people aren't going to think we're qualified or competent or we know the information. And so we just bombard people with the jargon, the technical, we know the talk, right? So the problem with that is that we make assumptions that everybody else understands what it is that we do. And when you start off at a level that they don't understand, you make them feel dumb. You confirm their imposter fears. And so then they're like, oh, no, I understand. Yeah, totally. I use CRISPR all the time, right? And they don't know what it is, right? And so if you start from a place of explaining things that's accessible, you always can get more detailed. You always can go into more depth, right? And if you confirm that they're an active participant and they have some knowledge in what you do, oh yeah, so that's like this, they just feel good about themselves, right? And now all of a sudden the whole approach to the conversation changes. So you want to make sure that you're making this very accessible. And one of the things we recommend is using a non-science analogy to do that. So what is a way that someone who is not in your discipline can understand what it is that you do? Some examples that postdocs have used before, there's a postdoc who does or did stem cell research in taste buds. And she used a cooking analogy and talked about how, you can have chicken, onion, tomatoes, but depending on what kind of spices you add, that dish could then become an Italian dish or an Indian dish or a Chinese dish, right? And so it was a way that you don't have to have an understanding of stem cells to understand that process, right? Another postdoc who studied ion channels used a cat door or a dog door analogy for things. So again, you want to create the thing that's memorable and that invites somebody into the conversation. And you want to try to make a human connection, right? Emotion is important. What is it about this that drew you into this work? Why is it that you got excited about this? How does it impact people's lives? That's one of the things that I think we don't do enough in science is to actually add in some emotion. And then you want to keep in mind, to whom are you speaking, right? So having a good science story is going to benefit you in every networking event you ever go to in your life. If it's a scientific conference, if it is a Thanksgiving dinner with grandma, right? Being able to talk about the work that you do in a way that lots of different people can understand is going to benefit you. Now, if you're going to that scientific conference, you can start at a different level of understanding, right? And you can more quickly move into that. But so again, think about, to whom am I going to be speaking? And you should think about this when you're giving presentations right now. Who's going to be there? Is this just for the lab? Is this for the entire department? What do other people do? I think that other scientists appreciate it more when they get invited into the conversation than when they're just spoken to. All right, so an example of this. So this was, personal research for me, right? So the important thing here, I think, is it starts with a question, right? So you heard of dopamine, and then you give some time for somebody to offer up what they know. Already in that situation, I'm not teaching, I'm not professing, I'm listening. So tell me what you know about it, right? So think about those kinds of things. How do you invite people in? Say, right, so dopamine is a chemical in our brains, signals when we've done something that feels good, makes us want to do that thing more, okay? So just a little bit of confirmation that, yes, they're correct and that's what it is. So our brain stops dopamine from doing this by sucking it back up into the cells and release it with something that's called the dopamine transporter, or DAT, right? It's like a vacuum cleaner sucking up dirt off a rug, okay? There's an analogy that somebody can grasp, right? Everybody's had that satisfaction of seeing a really dirty rug, you run the vacuum cleaner over, you see it disappear. It's in all the commercials, right? So cocaine works by blocking the vacuuming power of the DAT, just like a big dust ball can clog up a vacuum cleaner from picking up the dirt. And that's kind of gross, but it's memorable, okay? So again, that's an analogy that doesn't involve any understanding of cells, proteins, anything like that, okay? And so then you get into, okay, so this is what I do. And then interestingly, not all people who try cocaine are affected the same way. I study how these differences affect people's development of addiction, right? And again, you're going to write this out. The goal is never going to be to recite it verbatim, right? But writing it down and practicing delivering it makes it get more comfortable. When you test it out on your peers, when you go through this process, you will refine it and revise it to a place where it becomes very natural to do. And it all starts with just going through this process of thinking about, how do I talk about my work that doesn't rely on people having that scientific understanding? Okay. The career story is different, okay? The career story is about why you do what you do and how you do it, not the what of what you do, okay? So why did you go into this field? Why did you do this thing? What motivated you to do this? And so for students or postdocs right now, thinking about, well, what drew you into grad school? How'd you choose that lab? How'd you choose that project? Why are you doing those things, okay? It doesn't mean that this is where you're necessarily at in your career or where it's gonna end, but how did you get to the place where you are right now? And then share a little bit more about the process of what you offer outside of those technical skills. So again, this is motivations and non-technical skills. You're conveying your value. This is where the StrengthsFinder personality assessment becomes really important. So we do a workshop on this as well. StrengthsFinder uses positive psychology to identify your unique talents and strengths, right? So this is what you do well in lots of different situations. Having that language becomes really helpful when you're writing these kinds of narratives, because it's a way to identify those other aspects of what you do, right? This is one of those things that gets lost too. Just being the smartest person in the room doesn't mean you're going to be the most effective person in the room, right? It's an ability to get along with people, to build collaborations. Maybe you're a great communicator. Maybe you're the person who's great at coming up with ideas for things, right? These are all those talents that StrengthsFinder reveals. And so that personality assessment can be really helpful for this. An example of this, and again, this is going to be a little bit different because this is kind of where I'm at right now. It's not about kind of where I was when I was a student or a postdoc, but the idea is the same, right? So I've always enjoyed helping people solve their problems, okay? So that's that base level thing. Like this is this passion that I have, this thing that I find rewarding, right? It's what initially attracted me to preclinical drug abuse, but I realized over time that having an immediate impact was really important to me. So academic administration allows me to do that, get to problem solve and help people, which are the primary reasons why I love what I do, right? So again, what are those aspects about what you're doing right now? Maybe it is the process of scientific discovery that excites you. Maybe it's puzzle solving. Maybe it's teaching, helping other people learn, right? Like, what are those, like, forget about the discipline. What are the things that you do daily that you enjoy? Regardless of the particular problem, I'm going to help people understand the real issues, create strategies. Communication is often key. So this is where communication is one of my StrengthsFinder talents. So I'm building it in right here. These skills are critical to help me, and I utilize them daily for the stuff that I do. So in this process, I'm telling you about what I do, what I'm good at, the value that I have. You would employ this into an informational interview by then saying, I think being a blank would allow me opportunities to utilize my skills and passions, and I'm curious to learn about your experience doing this, right? So all of this is this question about, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And again, these are meant to be short conversation pieces. It's not like you're going to deliver one and then you're going to deliver the other. So you start talking about the science, and then somebody will ask you a question about that. That becomes a conversation. In the career story, create space for people to ask you questions, okay? But again, this is a way to start off the informational interview with information about yourself so that they now have an idea. And when they go into their own career, they can say, oh, well, yeah, actually, you mentioned that communication was one of the things you're really passionate about. I use that all the time, right? It helps them give you information about whether they think you would be a good fit for this career as well. All right, so I want to open up a little bit of time here just to talk about questions that people may have had if they went through the exercise. Again, it takes time. It's an iterative process. But if anybody wanted to ask anything about the exercises, we can address that right now. You can either put that in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask it, you can do that. So one question was about where can we go to get the StrengthsFinder assessment. So you can do that through Gallup, through their website. It's like $12 to take it. When we offer the workshop, we actually provide a complimentary assessment for that too. Again, that would be kind of up to you if you want to do it ahead of time or if you want to do it as part of the workshop. So I'll give a minute here. If people want to type something into the chat, I'll keep an eye out for some of those questions. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, you can just go ahead and do that right now too. So I've had others, and for myself, ask about how you explain a story for where you get somewhere, even if the basic reason is that was what was available. So basically how to spin something into a positive thing. Yeah, so actually, one of the things I'll offer about StrengthsFinder as well, I think that that's really important to think about. Oftentimes, what didn't result in necessarily the positive outcome we were expecting, what lessons did you learn from that becomes important. So those are always important things to think about as well. With StrengthsFinder, there's always the dreaded question when you go to an actual formal interview, which is like, well, tell me what you need to be better at, or tell me an area for improvement, right? And so the talents that you reveal in StrengthsFinder actually can help you with those as well. So harmony is one of my top talents. I'm always looking to build consensus. Sometimes things need to happen quickly, and we don't have time for everybody to come together around an agreement, and a decision needs to be made. So I could spin that positive trait as also one of those areas that require a little more work. All right, if there aren't questions about the exercises, we're gonna go ahead and move on into some more details about informational interviewing. And again, we'll have time at the end to address some of these questions if you do think of them and they keep coming in. Okay, so gathering information, right? So this is not about the job posting. This is so when you actually go into the informational interview, you're not going to try to find out the details. You're not looking for salary information. You're not looking for percentage of travel, right? That's information that you're actually going to get from a job posting. So you're not trying to get that information. This is just like asking for directions, right? So people were worried about this process. But just like you're in a new town and you're looking, you go into a gas station and say, hey, can you tell me how to get to this kind of place? This is all you're doing with an informational interview. Somebody is at a place where you want to be, and you're just asking them, how did they get there? What was that process like? Good questions include things like, what do you find most rewarding, right? What does a good day look like? What was helpful for making that transition? This is where you can get that insider knowledge about, well, I wish I had taken this kind of course, or I wish that I had had this preparation before I started doing this. What was most surprising about this job? What do you do more of than you thought you would have? What other careers did you consider when you were making this transition? Okay. We have a whole list of sample questions that's in the Google Drive. And so you can kind of go through that as a place to start. But again, you want to look at this and figure out, well, what questions do I want to know about this career? And again, the more information you can get from somebody who's actually doing it, the more directly applicable that can be. You can meet with me and we can talk about careers and, like making transitions and stuff like that. And I have ideas and I've talked to people and I've read stuff, but I haven't done those jobs, right? So again, you get that knowledge from people who are doing it, and you're just asking for directions. So you have to decide before you set up that informational interview, not before you set it up, but before you conduct it, what do you want to know? You want to go in prepared. And if you have a list of 25 questions and you only get to one because the person wouldn't shut up and they talked the whole time, that's fine. That's going to be a good conversation, right? Because they're going to remember it's like, oh, that was great. I just talked about myself all day. And then you can go back to that person in the future for things, right? Because part of this is not necessarily just a one-time thing. It could be, but it could be that you find somebody who seems really supportive that you can keep going back to for advice, on a continual basis. So expanding your professional network and leaving with referrals. So this is where you want to start utilizing each informational interview as a way to set up the next informational interview, okay? This is like a signaling cascade, okay? So you can think of it that way. So you're going to leave each interview with a new contact. So when we're asking for a warm referral, you're going to ask the person that you just finished talking with if they have a connection or somebody else who you could learn more for. So this is an example letter, right? So dear so-and-so, I recently spoke to some connection, somebody they know, about my interest in a whatever career. And they told me that you would be a great person to ask for more advice, right? Don't expect it. So this is just any kind of informational interview template stuff. I don't expect you to have a position. So you're being very explicit. I'm not asking for a job, right? I'm just hoping you might meet with me, or we could set up a call or a Zoom for 30 minutes to talk about blah. If you're willing, I'm happy to set that up. Please let me know some times that are available. So again, when you go through the informational interview and you talk to somebody, and it could even start with me. So if you're interested in, and chances are, regardless of what you're interested in doing, I know some alum, either PhD student or postdoc, that's doing that thing right now. So if we think about, so government research is one of those things, right? I went to grad school with a guy, Mike Guarnieri. He's now a senior scientist at NREL. And I would say absolutely, Mike's a great guy to talk to, right? So you would email Mike and you would say, dear Dr. Guarnieri, I recently was talking to Bruce Mant, so he knows me, right? So there's a connection. Automatically, he's paying more attention to your email than he would without that connection. I'm interested in exploring government research careers. Bruce said you might be a great person to talk to. I was hoping you might have a little time to chat with me, okay? So then at the end of that conversation, you say, Mike, this was great. I really appreciated the time, the information. As I continue to explore this career, can you think of anybody else who might be helpful for me to talk to? And Mike would say, well, yeah, actually, Jeff Linger just works across the hall from me. He's another really good guy to chat with. I'd suggest you contact him. And so then you contact Jeff and you say, dear Dr. Linger, I was just speaking with Mike Guarnieri, right? So you see that process so that in the informational interview, you're building out your professional connections, right? So that you start that process, which then means the only really difficult one becomes the first one, right? After that, everything is just these warm referrals and these connections. So you want to use this not just to get information, but also to start expanding your network, because now you start to, you become a known commodity as you continue to talk to these people, which again, you can understand why it's important to make those good first impressions, right? To be professional, to send thank you notes, to follow up, all those kinds of things, because these people are going to talk with each other, right? And they're going to know each other, and they're referring people in different places. All right. So how can you find somebody to interview? There's the dreaded cold call, but let me tell you, this is what LinkedIn is for, right? So LinkedIn is really meant to build out a professional network. You should not have any worry about contacting somebody on LinkedIn. There's some things you want to do to be more effective. You want to send a personalized message to connect. So when you connect with somebody, tell them why you're connecting. If you can drop a referral in there, that's great. If you met them at a conference or you were at a networking event, putting that context back in, right? So this is one of those ways that LinkedIn becomes easier. Company websites will have things listed. So you can just go ahead when you find somebody's email and reach out to them. Now, again, you're asking them to talk about what they do and about their careers, which is a very flattering process. So it's not the kind of thing that you really have to be too worried about in this, right? Because who doesn't like to talk about themselves? And that's really what you're saying here. You also can talk to other people in your network right now, talking to fellow students, talking to postdocs, talking to your advisors, right? This is one of those things that I think we often forget about. We're exposed to all of the faculty who remained in academia, but they all went to grad school with people, they postdoc with people. They know a lot of people that are doing things other than this. And so they can be a great resource for connections. Talking with other students, right? And who do they know and who have they met? Talking with postdocs. All of that, your own network, your peer and near peer network becomes a very effective tool for finding connections. And then you automatically have this built-in warm referral. Okay. It's always going to become easier when you can say, so-and-so who this person knows recommended I reach out to you. Following up from a networking event, like I was mentioning, right? So you collect business cards. Normally, now we don't do that. It's looking differently. But you would make a little note about that on the back of your business card. What did you talk about? Some conversation, something like that, right? And then that's the information you use when you connect with them on LinkedIn. You can write an article. So we have a newsletter on campus called the PhD Post. There's a whole series in there that's called Footsteps, and it's all about careers that alumni have. If you're interested in a career and you want to talk to somebody who's doing that, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm writing an article for this newsletter. Would you talk with me about your career? Right? That's a super easy way to do it because, hey, that'd be awesome. I'd love to be featured in that newsletter, right? And it's not about you and your career. You're doing it for this other purpose, okay? Along those lines, you can invite somebody to give a seminar. This could be at your department. It could be something for like Postdoc Research Day or some other symposium that you're organizing. This is often a way to invite in people who are kind of bigger names for things if you want to start reaching out to them. Again, I don't see any danger in emailing or connecting with the CEO on Pfizer on LinkedIn, right? They're not going to be like, oh, okay, who's this person? I'm not going to do. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is that they're going to ignore your request and they won't contact you. The best thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, sure, I'd be happy to chat with you about something. And one of the things we forget about oftentimes is that when scientists leave academia, they still have this inner desire to provide some mentorship, right? Because that's part of this process. That's part of the training. That's part of what we do. That's one of the things that most people like about academia is this opportunity to teach and advise and provide guidance. And that stays true even when they leave to other careers. And so I would never be shocked to find out that people in very high profile positions would be very responsive to a request that you would make, right? So nothing ventured, nothing gained. And don't forget, right, in all of this, you're just trying to get directions. You're just asking people, tell me more about yourself and what is it that you do? And so that's a flattering request, right? Most people will find time. If you approach it strategically so that you're professional in how you ask for the request, you're prepared for the conversation. So you're ready to talk about yourself. You're ready to ask them some questions. And then you send those follow-ups. It's really not that stressful. It shouldn't be that stressful of a thing to do because, again, you're just asking them to share with you what it is that they're doing now so you can learn more about it as you're making these decisions. Okay. And again, expanding your professional network, getting insider knowledge, all of these things are the important things to do now before you get to the point of applying for positions. Because once you have this stronger professional network, once you have people who are willing to give you some advice, then down the road, when you're actually applying for jobs, you can contact them and say, hey, I really appreciated talking with you 3 months ago about this. I've really decided this is what I want to do. I'm getting ready to apply for these positions. Would you give me some feedback on my resume? Or maybe you find a position at their company and you say, hey, this is great. I really appreciate that. I also thought, your company sounded great. I saw this position there. Do you know who the hiring manager is? To which they may even respond and say, well, just send it to me. I'll give it to them. That's fine, right? So again, you start to lay the foundations for things that will be really important for making these transitions smoother by starting to gather this information and building your professional network now. All right, so I want to take the poll again. Let's see. I want to know if there's been any change in how people feel about informational interviewing and the process of that. And then we'll spend a little bit of time just addressing questions that you may have. All right, that's a win for me. Feels like we got people excited about this process. Again, I'm not trying to minimize how anxiety provoking this can be. It absolutely can be. One of the things we know about anxiety is that its role is to stop you from doing things. Anxiety is its main job is to get you to avoid things that you perceive as being unsafe. It's natural to have that feeling now, but when you allow it to stop you from doing this thing that can be really important for your career, that's when anxiety is winning. And so if you feel worried about it, if you're really nervous about it, let's talk more about that, right? Those safe connections of warm referrals are a great way to start. You can do this with people in the department. You can do this with fellow postdocs and students. When we do this workshop in person, oftentimes we actually go through a practice exercise where you just conduct some interviews with each other. And I swear after every one, people are like, oh, I was really nervous about doing that before and it wasn't bad. Okay? You have the power to do this, I promise. All right. So with that, I want to get to questions that you may have about informational interviews, to talk through any other questions that may have come up. Again, the worksheet is meant to get you started and get you thinking about how do you talk about your science, how do you talk about your interests and value. If you find other ways to do that, that's great. But again, start that process of thinking about seeing how you're going to talk about what it is that you do. Sorry, apologies for not sharing. I thought I shared the results from the last one. I didn't hit it. So there you see it. So we had 63% moved to excited. All right. So question to everyone. What if you see an appealing job posting at a particular company before you had a chance to do an informational interview with anyone there? So this is one of those things. Let me stop sharing here so we can just kind of go back to normal view and I can see people and all those things that make it easier for me to function a little bit. So one of the things that I worry about when people are transitioning careers and starting to apply for positions is that they only start going through the process of finding a position online, filling out the materials and submitting the application. And data tell us that when that's your strategy, 90% of the time, you're not going to hear anything back. Not 90% of the time you're not going to get the job. 90% of the time, you're not going to hear anything back. And so you as the applicant, as you go through this process and you're putting this material out there and you're hearing nothing but crickets, it's easy to start internalizing that and feeling like, boy, what am I doing wrong? I'm never going to get that job. Like, I'm stuck here. Like, all of those things can creep in. But the reality is that that's just the reality. That's what it's like. So employing that as your only career transition strategy becomes really difficult and demoralizing. So I would say if you find positions you're interested in, always apply for them, right? And we can talk about how do you tailor those materials and how do you maybe make it a little bit more effective when you're applying for them. Go after those jobs, but don't do that as your only strategy, okay? In addition to that, start conducting informational interviews. This should be part of that process. Again, if you have time to do this before you start applying for positions, then you can leverage all of that hard work when you start applying for those positions. If you have a 30-minute conversation with somebody about what it is that they do, and you feel like that was a good conversation, a good connection, and they say, hey, just let me know if you ever have other questions, it's not a big ask then later on to say, would you give me some feedback on my resume? Right? And so those are the kinds of things that can happen once you've laid the groundwork, once you've established this process. So don't approach the career transitions purely through just applying for jobs online. Try implementing some of these other strategies as well. And if you have time, the advice you get from people about what's important to transition, you can actually implement that before you start applying for those jobs. If they say, well, yeah, if you had a course on project management, that would be really helpful. Or, knowing more about R would become really helpful, or whatever it is, right? You can start trying to get those specific experiences that people on the inside are telling you, this is a really important aspect of my job. try to get some information about doing that. Okay. When they ask about your background, do you recommend going into a brief science story and following on with a career story, or blending these as needed? And it's easy to get derailed when telling your story by the interviewee jumping on the first thing and running with that. So I would say the purpose of both of these is to be prepared with something to start a conversation. If they jump in and start chatting about other stuff, just go where it goes, right? If there are opportunities to come back to the, oh yeah, no. Like later on in the conversation, if they start talking about one of those skills that you've identified that you have, you can put it in at that point. Okay. So you want to get them talking with you. You want it to be a dialogue and a conversation. These are important because they give you a way to start that. And sometimes people are really quiet and they won't say anything. And so then you don't have dead air. You have something that you can actually talk about through that. So again, I would say be flexible in the moment and respond to what that person is. Let them drive the conversation. If they want to ask you questions about what you're doing, that's great. That's all you want them to do, right? So then just see where the conversation goes from that point. So one thing I'm going to share here to everyone is just the workshop evaluation. If you would complete this and give me some feedback, I'd really appreciate it before you sign off. I'll stay on and continue addressing these questions. But again, having some of the data on the workshop allows me to revise it to make sure we're providing value to you, but then also helps me justify to other people that the kind of work we're doing is actually important. I shouldn't have said that probably because maybe that's biasing results, but all right. So another question was questions about previous workshops. So the career exploration workshop, we're going to post online at some point. The materials are available on the website. Some of the things that we recommended in there, like the AAAS My IDP, as a way to find, to start building some awareness of your career interests and things. Those are opportunities that are available online all the time. If you have specific questions about materials and resources, I would encourage you just to send me an email and I can connect you directly to those. Okay, another question, how much of your career story should be the roadmap of your career versus just describing who you are now? That's a great question. I think sometimes weaving together how what you like doing got you to where you are now can help. At this point, having that roadmap for where you're at now probably is not too important relative to describing why you do what you do and how and what you like about what you're doing right now, right? Because for most people, it's going to be, well, I did undergrad and I was good at science, so I did a PhD and I was still good at science, so I did a postdoc, right? It's more about, well, why did you choose this field? What drove you into this? What got you passionate about this flavor of science? What is it about that got you to that, rather than I did this and then that led me to believe that I would be good at a PhD program and all of that stuff. Okay, all right, and look at that. We got 1 minute left. If there are other questions, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. If you have any questions about this, again, if still you're feeling like, boy, I don't know that I can start this process, I don't know that I can do that, you can go ahead and reach out to me and we can talk about that. So one other question just came in. So do people ever ask for resumes, CVs? They can sometimes. That can be helpful to have something prepared. The challenge with having something prepared beforehand, unless it's a CV, is that resumes are really most effective when they are specifically tailored for a position. And so if somebody says, send me just send me your general resume, you haven't tailored it to highlight what you would offer for any particular job. And so it can be a missed opportunity in some ways. If they ask for it, absolutely send them something, but feel comfortable saying, yeah, no, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just let me update it first. So you have an opportunity to put in a little bit more. And again, I would spend a little bit of time in that situation trying to tailor it to the kinds of things that you were talking about in that conversation. So some specific evidence, some specific accomplishments that may help people understand the kinds of things that you said you do well. Here it is on paper for that. So yeah, it can be, and if they ask for it, that's great. There are a lot of times that these conversations do have tangible results that are exactly like that, where, a couple months later, somebody contacts you and says, hey, we just had this job opening. I remember talking about it. So don't underestimate the potential job opportunities that can come out of this as well. Don't go in presuming that somebody wants to see your CV or your resume. I would never recommend sending a resume along with the request, right? Because again, the informational interview is about them, not about you. If they ask for it, you can always provide that later, but you want to go into this saying, I'm trying to learn about you and what it is that you do. Okay. All right. With that, I thank you all for coming. I appreciate your feedback on the survey. We'll do the LinkedIn workshop October 21st. So I hope to see you at that one and then at future workshops as well. And if there's ever anything else that I can do, please just shoot me an email and let me know.